Every day, thousands of sailors walk into a workplace where a steel cable can cross the deck faster than the human eye can track it, where fighter jets blast past at speeds approaching 200 miles per hour, and where a single mistake can trigger an accident measured not in injuries, but in casualties. The strange part is that this isn't considered unusual. It's just another day aboard a U.S. aircraft carrier. For more than a century, the Navy has developed training programs designed to prepare sailors for an environment filled with jet exhaust, live explosives, heavy machinery, and risks that most civilian workplaces could never legally tolerate. Yet even among the thousands of jobs required to keep a carrier operating, a handful stand apart for the danger they involve. Today, we're counting down the 5 most dangerous jobs aboard a U.S. aircraft carrier and the extraordinary training required to do them. We'll start at number 5 and work our way to the position that many sailors regard as the most dangerous workplace anywhere at sea. Number 5. The nuclear reactor operator. Every one of America's 11 aircraft carriers runs on nuclear power. The Nimitz class ships each carry 2 Westinghouse A4W reactors. The Gerald R. Ford class carriers use 2 A1B reactors, which is a newer design producing even more power. Together, those reactors drive a ship displacing roughly 100,000 tons across the ocean at speeds exceeding 30 knots. They also power everything aboard: the lights, the catapults, the radar, and the galleys, cooking 17,000 meals a day. The men and women operating those reactors are called nuclear machinist mates, nuclear electronics technicians, and nuclear electricians mates, and the Navy itself calls their work one of the most intellectually and physically demanding jobs in the entire service. Getting into that reactor room is not something the Navy leaves to chance. Candidates must score exceptionally high on the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, specifically in mathematics, chemistry, physics, and engineering. From there, they enter one of the most intensive enlisted training pipelines in the U.S. military, Nuclear Power School in Goose Creek, South Carolina. That program runs 6 months of full-time academic instruction, meaning more classroom hours than many college semesters, covering nuclear theory, reactor physics, and the specific plant designs used aboard Navy ships. After Power School, every candidate spends another 6 months at a prototype facility operating an actual naval reactor under supervision before they ever set foot on a deployed carrier. Only after passing both programs and clearing a thorough background investigation do they report to the ship. Once aboard, the training does not stop. The Navy conducts what it calls an Operational Reactor Safeguards Examination, or ORS, which is a surprise inspection by a board of former senior nuclear officers. The entire reactor department is evaluated under real operating conditions. Ships that fail face serious consequences. The standard does not lower because the deployment schedule is busy. It stays exactly where it is because the reactor does not negotiate. Number 4. The Aviation Ordnanceman. Below the flight deck, in spaces most Americans will never see. A group of sailors in red jerseys are doing something that demands absolute precision. That means handling the weapons, bombs, missiles, torpedoes, rockets, and ammunition for the aircraft guns. The Aviation Ordnanceman, or the AO, is responsible for receiving, inspecting, assembling, storing, and loading every piece of live ordnance that goes onto a Navy aircraft. On a carrier conducting flight operations, that is not a slow or occasional task. It is constant, and it is conducted around explosive material in a confined steel environment while the ship moves. The red jersey is no accident. On a carrier flight deck, color coding is survival. Everyone knows that a red shirt near an aircraft is working with ordnance or firefighting equipment, and they give that sailor the appropriate space. The Navy's own safety designation, HERO, which stands for Hazards of Electromagnetic Radiation to Ordnance, exists because certain ordnance can be triggered by the electromagnetic fields generated by the ship's own systems. Every aviation ordnanceman is trained to understand those hazards and work around them. Entry into this rating starts with boot camp, followed by 9 weeks of intensive A school at the Naval Aviation Technical Training Center in Pensacola, Florida. That curriculum covers aviation ordnance systems, handling procedures, safety protocols, inspection standards, and the specific regulations governing how explosives are stored, moved, and loaded aboard a ship. The ASVAB requirements are specific and demanding. The Navy requires a combined score across arithmetic, mechanical, and assembly skills that filters out candidates who cannot handle the technical load. Number 3. The Damage Controlman. Fire and flooding have been the two greatest dangers aboard any warship for as long as there have been warships. On an aircraft carrier, those two threats are amplified by everything else the ship carries: jet fuel, live ordnance, nuclear reactors, and 5,000 people packed into a steel hull. In 2026, the USS Gerald R. Ford experienced a serious fire during operations in the Red Sea. It took the crew roughly 30 hours to extinguish it completely. The ship had to divert to Greece for temporary repairs. A maritime strategist who served as an advisor to the Navy Secretary described the crew's response plainly: "It was a testament to their training and resiliency." That training belongs to one of the most critical ratings on any Navy ship, the Damage Controlman. These are the sailors who, when general quarters sounds and the passageways fill with smoke, move toward the problem. They are the Navy's shipboard first responders, trained in firefighting, ship stability, flooding response, and defense against chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear threats. Their job description, as the Navy states it officially, is to prevent accidents and keep the ship and crew out of harm's way. The lesson that changed how the Navy trains damage controlmen was written in 1967. When a fire aboard the USS Forrestal killed 134 sailors. Investigators found that most of the crew, outside of dedicated firefighting teams, had little practical training in shipboard fire suppression. Foam teams and water teams worked against each other. Untrained sailors made decisions that spread the fire instead of containing it. The Navy rewrote its damage control doctrine from the ground up after that disaster, and the philosophy behind what emerged is the same philosophy that governs training today. Every sailor is a damage controlman, and those who carry that rating professionally are trained to a standard that has no civilian equivalent. Damage Controlman, a school, runs at Naval Station Great Lakes and covers shipboard firefighting, flooding control, dewatering procedures, and emergency repair techniques. But the training that matters most happens at sea and in dedicated shore-based facilities that replicate the conditions aboard a real ship. The Surface Warfare Officers School Firefighting and Damage Control Learning Site in Yokosuka, Japan is one example. It runs live fire scenarios using actual JP-8 jet fuel, the same fuel burning on a carrier flight deck, specifically because the heat and smoke are more authentic than propane alternatives. The Navy has kept that facility burning real fuel because there is no substitute for training in conditions as close to the actual threat as possible. Think of the ship as a roll of bubble wrap, the fire marshal of the USS Eisenhower once explained. If there is only one bubble and it fills with smoke, the whole ship fills with smoke. Damage controlmen are the people who every day make sure those bubbles hold. Number 2, the hook runner. When a Navy jet comes in for a carrier landing, it is traveling at roughly 150 miles per hour. The pilot extends the aircraft's tailhook, which is a steel arm hanging below the fuselage, and aims to snag one of 4 arresting cables stretched across the deck. The cable catches the hook, feeds through a hydraulic system below deck, and stops a 40,000 pound aircraft in approximately 2 seconds across roughly 300 feet of runway. If the hook misses all 4 cables, called a bolter, the pilot shoves the throttle to full power and goes around for another attempt. If something else goes wrong, the consequences range from severe to catastrophic. The aircraft lands, the tailhook catches, and almost immediately, 2 sailors sprint directly toward it. They are the hook runners, wearing green jerseys as part of the arresting gear crew. Their job is to disengage the cable from the hook manually and signal the deck edge operator to retract it before the next aircraft comes in. The next aircraft may be on final approach already. The time available to complete this task is not generous. These sailors are operating inches from a steel cable that moments before was absorbing the kinetic energy of a fully loaded Navy jet. They do it dozens of times per flight operations period. Every time. The hook runner position is not a job that comes with months of classroom preparation. It is learned through qualification, observation, and supervised repetition in the most unforgiving classroom that exists, an active carrier flight deck during operations. New green shirt sailors begin by observing experienced hook runners and learning the signals, the timing, and the precise sequence of actions required. They study the arresting gear systems, the Mach 7 hydraulic systems used on Nimitz-class carriers, and the newer advanced arresting gear installed on the Gerald R. Ford. Understanding what the cable is doing mechanically, what a proper retract signal looks like, and what happens when something goes wrong. Number 1. The flight deck crew, the shooter. The flight deck of a U.S. aircraft carrier has often been called the most dangerous 4.5 acres on Earth. That is not a metaphor. It is a description of a workplace where jet exhaust, spinning propellers, moving aircraft, steel arresting cables under enormous tension, hurricane force winds, and the open ocean just feet away all exist in the same space, often during round-the-clock flight operations. Catapult systems generate enough force to launch a 60,000-pound aircraft from 0 to 165 miles per hour in roughly 2 seconds. Jet intakes can pull in anything that gets too close, while exhaust blasts are powerful enough to knock an unprotected sailor off their feet. Every movement on the deck takes place amidst deafening noise, limited visibility, and machinery capable of causing catastrophic injury in an instant. During flight operations, this is not an environment where mistakes are easily forgiven. It is an environment where a single lapse in attention can end a career or a life. At the center of it all stands the catapult officer or the shooter. This is the officer wearing a yellow jersey who crouches beside the aircraft on the bow catapult, checks every system, verifies the calculations, looks the pilot in the eye, and then extends one finger toward the sky before dropping into a crouch and sending a multi-million-dollar jet and the pilot inside it off the bow of the ship. The shooter is the final human authority on every launch. If something is wrong with the catapult settings, the weight calculations, the wind data, or the aircraft itself, the shooter is the last person who can stop it. And when the launch goes right, which it must, every single time, they do it again. Shooters are typically naval aviators or naval flight officers themselves, meaning they already carry the training and experience of carrier-qualified pilots before they ever stand behind a catapult. The flight deck crew surrounding the shooter, the blue shirts directing aircraft, the red shirts managing ordnance, the purple shirts fueling jets, the green shirts running cables, are all working through their own qualification pipelines simultaneously. The Navy has invested in virtual reality training systems to give new flight deck personnel their first exposure to the environment before they ever walk out onto a live deck. But every experienced flight deck sailor says the same thing: nothing fully prepares you for the first time you stand out there during actual flight ops. The noise alone, jet engines at full power from 50 feet away, is physically overwhelming. The wind from jet blasts can knock a person down. And the pace does not slow down while you adjust. What prepares them is the system the Navy built and has refined across a century of carrier aviation. Color-coded jerseys so that everyone on deck knows exactly what role each person plays. Standardized hand signals so that communication works without words in an environment where voices are useless. Safety petty officers monitoring the deck continuously. Mandatory qualification standards that must be met before any new sailor is authorized to perform any task unsupervised. And the culture, which every experienced flight deck sailor describes the same way: you watch out for the person next to you, because they are watching out for you. Closing, 5 jobs. 5 training pipelines built on a century of hard lessons. And the men and women who go through them are doing it voluntarily, most of them before their 25th birthday. To keep the most powerful naval force in history running at full capability. Every day, in every ocean, in every condition the sea throws at them. That is not something that happens by accident. It happens because the United States Navy built a system to make it happen, and because the sailors who walk those decks trust that system with their lives. Which of these 5 surprised you most? Drop it in the comments. If you want to see more on how America's Navy trains for the jobs nobody else is willing to do, hit subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.